Hello, I'm Ozymandias12 and welcome to another discussion on film. Before we get started on this one, though, I would like to say just a huge thank you to the community and everyone that's supporting me in this channel. I mean, I've been receiving an overwhelming amount of comments, positive comments and feedback on my videos of just pure agreement and how right I am with a lot of things. So I just want to thank you for all those comments and all those likes, because it really is warming the cockles of my heart. Just super positive. Really love to see it. Keep it up, guys. I really like your positive feedback. Now, let's talk about the best decades in film. Now, the 70s is kind of the dawn of where everything started changing for film, where you get your modern directors, your Scorseses, your Spielbergs, Francis Ford Coppola, Brian De Palma. They all start making films, and it's only until kind of the latter half of the 70s where you really get some changes in the course of history. You didn't get these, hey, Smell, what do you think of this? See, the comedies weren't just slapstick. You started getting some real changes in film. So that's something like Jaws. You had the birth of the blockbuster, and it was kind of a horror film as well. It's like where something about a shark just attacking a bay of people, but it had such a great hype around it that people were just like, yes, this is amazing. Did you see the shark? Did you see this huge shark? And really, it was just this big rubber mechanical fish under the water that didn't really work half the time. You know, it really scared audiences. People didn't go to the beach after it. You really started getting under people's skin. Same with The Godfather by Francis Ford Coppola. Really well-written characters, fantastic acting. It was 3 hours long, but no one really cares about that. It's just so good, and it's affected every other film since, every other drama. Basically, every guy quotes it. It's such a big film, and you get other ones like Dog Day Afternoon and little dramas. I think Network might have been back then. Like things that really kind of started to turn the tides and changed your idea of what a film could be. And then, of course, you get Superman, like one of the first superhero films. Usually they were just for kids. This one made real people believe that he was flying. It really started to incorporate CGI and graphics and showed you how films could be changed. And then, of course, you get Star Wars, which just blew everything out of the water. Just something so crazy that normally would be taken with a bit of a, oh my God, this looks stupid, but people really took to it, and people became fanatical about it. You know, you had Star Trek before it, and you have some fanatics, but once Star Wars came, people started to really go, holy crap, this is amazing, and getting obsessed. So you really had these stepping stones and building blocks of something fantastic, all that kind of stuff. So you got the 70s, which is a pretty important, decade in film. But I would say it's only the latter half, so I'd take it down a couple of marks, because the first half is kind of wishy-washy. And really, I've named most of the big films there. Maybe you've got Alien there, which is kind of, the dawn of horror. Same with Halloween. You got those films kind of creeping up. Now, these provided the, building blocks for the 80s, which is, I would say, the third best decade. In the 80s, everyone took these ideas of Star Wars and Blade Runner, sci-fi, comedies. Comedies especially just kind of blew up in the 80s and became a whole lot more ridiculous. You got all your kind of Animal Houses, and then you got your teen comedies, your John Hughes films pop up. You have Bill Murray, John Candy, Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, all these guys just kind of creating films and becoming the biggest stars out there. And then you get your action films, your super action stars like Sly Stallone and Schwarzenegger, and even Bruce Willis with Die Hard coming through. I mean, it just seems it was a period of excess in the 80s where they just started kind of throwing money and creating anything and everything, and it was actually amazing. The range of films that were created during the 80s is amazing. And of course, it's got all those weird fashions and the great soundtracks. But there's a lot of misses, I have to say. As much as they did really cool stuff like The Thing, experimental techniques with Tron, Terminator comes along, James Cameron pops up with kind of a meshing of a sci-fi tale and a horror film, as well as Back to the Future. You're getting a lot of great mixtures of genres, which they didn't really do as much back in the day, and it's coming out with just massive success. And you're getting all these really interesting films. Sequels start to pop up. Things start to duplicate. I think action films start to really take a front and center turn with the better use of stunts and CGI work and, sound effects and special effects, all that kind of stuff. People just really start pushing the bar in the 80s, which is great to see. As wacky as it was and as many mishits as they had, you had Oliver Stone coming through with Platoon, war dramas. You just got all these different directors and actors showing how diverse and different and kind of wacky the film scene could be in the 80s, which is why I'd put it at number 3. There's probably more better films just because they were making more films back then, but you can see it just has such a buzz about it in the 80s, and I really like that period. It's number 3 for me, but if you want to get into the best ones, it's either, these top 2 could be interchangeable. And I'm going to have to say the 90s is number 2, because the 90s, they started just finessing the craft. They really started, in the 80s, they kind of did whatever they could. In the 90s, they kind of go, all right, now this works, this works, this works, and we've got our genres really clearly defined. Like comedies you get some of the best comedies ever written in the 90s with Dumb and Dumber, Something About Mary, Happy Gilmore, all those kind of films that we go back to with the big stars. Like Jim Carrey hit the scene and was making more money than anybody else, especially in 1994. And in that same year, you get Forrest Gump. Tom Hanks starts acting his heart out and becoming one of the best actors around. Same with Robert De Niro. Scorsese starts hitting his stride with his crime films again. As much as he did a lot in the 80s, he really starts becoming and doing his best work in the 90s. Goodfellas, Casino. Spielberg is unstoppable in the 90s. Jurassic Park, Schindler's List. Basically, they got the balance perfect with storytelling, with CGI work, and with action. It wasn't too much CGI where it looked faked. It was a good blend of I can't see the lines where it's fake and what's real. What you saw, when you saw a car jump off and explode in the air and a person fall down and jump out with a parachute, that actually happened. They actually prepared all that stuff, and it looks so much better than what we see today. And I just love watching those films. I watched Speed the other day. I had a friend who couldn't believe that they blew up a whole plane, and it looks fantastic. It's just like you get so much more invested in those films. It's so much easier to watch, and I just think that the 90s, not only was the storytelling magnificent, not only were the ideas big and bold like Jurassic Park, but it was just achieved with such a level of finesse. And you had these fantastic filmmakers like Spielberg who could just almost do no wrong, creating these works of art that have become, our childhood. What I remember, some of the best parts of my childhood, talking about that film, watching that film. And you also get, Quentin Tarantino, David Fincher started to come into his own with Seven, Fight Club. But it's so good. I think the films of the 90s are amazing. But it still isn't the best period. I think it's leading into the best period, which is the noughties. I think after the 2000s, I think it's basically the same argument, just a bit more finesse. I think the CGI was better. I think they knew how to meld them into the scene a bit better. I also think you get Spielberg, Scorsese, Christopher Nolan coming up, Quentin Tarantino, David Fincher, all these top directors kind of really at the peak of their game, testing each other, coming up with other great ideas. Action films were still dominating, and it was like a multitude of action films. It was the spy genre. You had Casino Royale come out in that time, Jason Bourne, and then you've got the superhero movies coming into the fray and no longer being treated as that kind of, lower class action film, but the one that's making all the money, leading all the way up to The Dark Knight, which is probably the pinnacle of superhero movies. But you also had fantastical trilogies like Lord of the Rings come up and become the biggest films. This period was just fantastic. They didn't saturate the screen with CGI effects. It was a good mix of stunt work and good storytelling, mixed with a real clear director's vision where you just, they made some of the best films of all time. If you counted up all the best films, I think the noughties easily has it, like over the other decades. It was just, the best period, people challenging each other, people wanting to see films and demanding this quality. And that's why I think the noughties is the best decade in film and probably won't be beaten, because I think since 2014, the quality in films has really gone down. And that's why number 5, that's why I wanted to do number 4 first, because number 5 is basically the decade we're living in now. I think after 2010, I would say probably after 2014, films just started getting really bad. And why do you think they got really bad? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is the overuse of CGI. Now, it might be cheaper, it might be safer, but in terms of watching something and really experiencing and getting people invested, they disconnect. We know what CGI looks like. We know when you put a green screen and it's not a real city in the background, it's just something that they've created. It's too easy to see. It doesn't look realistic. It has that uncanny effect. And I think filmmakers just think, oh, they wouldn't know. They wouldn't know that that plane's not real. Well, after you watch it enough, you kind of start going, no, I can easily see that's not real. And you disconnect. The effect of what you're trying to do on the film is less. And that's what people started to rely on during this time, especially with the Marvel films. I think they've had such a great effect. It was like probably the best business decision ever made when they all got together and all worked in the Avengers in 2012 and they created this fantastic universe. But it started soaking up all the other genres because Marvel films became half a comedy, half an action film, half a drama, half a love story or whatever. You know, they just kind of put it all in the one, and then you've got all the birth of everything else like YouTube and Twitter and Instagram. You know, all those fantastical films that you could only find in cinema during the 90s. Well, that's been split up and put out everywhere. And now all films have these days, they don't have the wow factor or anything like that. It's just storytelling. All you can do is tell a good story, and that's always been the strength of films. So, you know, they're feeling a little depleted, but really you've still got your main weapon, but they're not pushing the bar. They're not challenging everyone. So that's why a lot of these films are just cut and copy paste. It's very safe. It's like, is it a superhero film? Can we put this new character that no one's ever seen? And will they get people in? Yes, that's what we'll do. And that's how they make films these days. But at the same time, which directors can we rely on? Like most of our greatest directors are all too old to be. They're not as youthful as they are. And the directors that we're seeing these days quickly fizz out. They'll come up with one great film, and then their second film will be completely devoid of what we saw in the first time. So, I don't know, it seems to be a bit of a change in the mentality of film these days. And I don't know why it is. I think it might be, you know, people trying to cut costs. I think there's a lot of problems with where it's going, and I'd like to see a shake-up. Because otherwise we can look forward to another decade of film of only seeing maybe 5 great films during that whole time. I've no doubt that they're going to keep making films and the film business will survive on and on, but I want to see us get back to peak filmmaking instead of just avoiding costs and just trying to overthink a lot of films. Let's just get some directors that know how to make films, give them the films that they want to make, and let's see what happens. Anyway, that's my thoughts on the best decades in film. I'll see you later.